Hello, and welcome to Bookish Haze, a podcast where we get to talk about two of our favorite things, Taylor Swift and reading. I'm Katie.
And I'm Sameen, and every episode we're going to take a book or series and analyze the characters as they relate to songs across Taylor Swift's entire discography. Hey everyone, and welcome back to Bookish Haze. We are once again doing a blind date with a book episode. This time around, you will not see any promo videos come out where Katie and I are showing ourselves writing a note to send via snail mail because we have, at this exact moment in time, given up on this. So if anyone knows what to do with another $15 of postage stamps, hit me up. That being said, we did swap books. I don't have a physical copy of my book, but do we want to, on the count of three, each take turns in saying our book names?
Sounds good.
1, 2, 3.
Okay, so I have also a digital book, but I have How High We Go in the Dark by Sequoia Nagamatsu.
And I have Boy Parts by Eliza Clark.
Yay. So usually we've been trying to pick off of our, we've always been picking off our TBRs, but we've been trying to do physical books that we already own. And this time we decided to stray and give ourselves some more options. So these are just picks from somewhere on our list. Honestly, did not remember why this was on my list, but I did really enjoy it. So it was a great pick.
Nice. Yeah, we did do off the Storygraph TBR. So honestly, it is a superior app, and I'm really glad to have a TBR on there. But yeah, I had no idea that this book was even sitting there. I think when you texted it to me, I was like, what is this called? I've literally never heard of this before. But it was definitely good to read something that was a little bit different. Can you walk us through a little bit about yours first, and we'll kind of divvy up the episode that way?
Yeah, let's do it. Okay, so this book was, I don't know if they would call them short stories because they were all like interconnected, but like I guess a series of anecdotes about humanity when this virus outbreaks and affects everyone, or starting with children and then affects adults eventually. And if that sounds familiar, that is no surprise. And it is basically a series of stories from different characters' point of views. So you start off with this scientist who basically discovers the virus, and then you kind of end with the, I guess in this sense you would say like the creator of Earth. And what that actually is just like, in our terms, some alien who exists on a planet that basically are caretakers of different planets. So they have like the seed, and they can see all the different possibilities and realities of what this world could become. And then they kind of like send it off into space, rip the time continuum or whatever, and then go and assign a caretaker to each planet. And so it's kind of, yeah, like the journey of when this virus outbreaks, like how does humanity adapt to that and what happens, and then like what happens afterwards, and kind of how it all started is explained at the end. I feel like I did not do a good job in making that sound exciting, but it was actually really, really good.
No, that sounds really fascinating. I did not expect this to go down a science fiction route when you said that. And also, I just think that it's really fitting. We are recording this, for anyone who's curious, on March 18th, which is like very close to the 5-year anniversary of COVID outbreak just like being declared an actual pandemic. So that actually feels very fitting for this weekend's read. But yeah, that's wild. How did they string kind of the anecdotes together?
Yeah, so I guess to give context, the virus that occurred was essentially where your different body parts, so like your lung, your liver, I guess different organs is a better way to put it, started growing in different places. So your heart slowly got transformed into your brain, or like your liver was becoming like your heart, something like that. And also, I will say the like space aspect of it was a little confusing to me, just in terms of visualizing, because it was like you could sometimes see lights coming out of them, because essentially the being, the caretaker of the world, her species was like pure light.
Interesting.
Yeah, and so that's how it all started. And we start off with like children getting infected, and then that becomes like, okay, so obviously it's very sad to see children like wither away and die. And so these like amusement park pops up where you can take your child on this wonderful day and then basically send them to their death on a roller coaster.
This is like a
Yeah, like
twisted Make-A-Wish?
yeah, like low key, yes. So that was actually the second story, and that was so interesting. But anyways, back to your original question, which was like how all these intertwined. Each of these stories are from a different character's point of view, and you'll essentially like in other stories later see some aspect of them, kind of like a cameo. So, for example, the person who was in charge of not running the amusement park, but like a worker at the amusement park, he was a mouse character. He like then popped up in a different story where someone had brought their kid to this amusement park and then later gone on to the spaceship that got sent into space to find Earth number two. And so
Ooh.
you're like, meet characters in the stories that you then connect later on. And it is kind of fun, I will say, because it's like at some point there's this unexplained, I don't know if they were in a different astral plane, but that's kind of how I visualized it, where a bunch of adults who became infected with this virus were all in some kind of vacuum or black hole
Mhm.
maybe, and they like couldn't see anything. They kind of waded through this series of memories, which like if you picture Inside Out and how you have those little balls of memories, that's kind of
Mhm.
how I think I viewed it, where you kind of
Ooh.
get sucked into the memory. So that was kind of cool. And essentially, they found this baby who also was in this void and decided that they should live and made a human pyramid that was um, unexplained number of people high and like shoved this baby out. And so you're like, okay, that's crazy. That was like the third story. Wonder what happened. And then at the end of the book, there is an explanation where it was like, oh, my grandma was a baby during the
Oh, no.
plague and talked about like getting shoved out into the air somewhere.
Oh,
Um,
that's so weird.
yeah, and like always had this unexplained fascination. So just like little pieces like that, which were just, it wasn't exactly like, okay, this character showed up and then you get their point of view later. It was sometimes directly like that, where it was like, okay, we got the point of view of one brother and then we got the point of view of a different one. But it was also more of like this other character that you might not think is relevant. Actually, we do get to see them not from their point of view, but from like their granddaughter's point of view. So it was really cool.
Oh, that's really interesting. I feel like that actually sounds, I'm just saying that this just sounds like things that I can relate to at this point. But like I watched Les Mis, honestly at this point it was like literally 15 years ago, but it just reminds me of like how it felt like that story kind of came together, at least in the movie version of it. Because it just like took a second to realize like, oh, like this person knows that person and like this is the relationships between them. And it was kind of fun to see like the story unfold on the screen in that way. So I imagine it was just like it's kind of fun to sort out that mystery of like, okay, what's going on, but also like who is who.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel like the last chapter or so was like I said the alien who like was the caretaker of Earth, um, walking us through her history and how she like first came to the planet and like how she went through the different decades with humanity. And that was interesting because it became clear that like some of the characters you had read their point of views were actually her like inhabiting. I don't know if she like inhabited them or just like was
Mhm.
them, but somehow she like took on human forms and like became them. And at the very beginning, there was like this pendant that was like very important to the character, this one character that died. And then turns out she was that character, and it gives the backstory of the pendant. And yeah, so I don't know. It was just like, it seems like a complicated book to plan, but it was like very well done and wrapped up super nicely in a way that I feel like not a lot of books do.
Nice. What did you end up rating it?
I actually haven't rated it. I just finished it
Okay.
not that long ago. I would probably give it like a 4, 4.5.
Nice. Okay,
Yeah,
so it's
like
like a really good read.
yeah, I would highly recommend it. I think it's really interesting. It's very like a pretty easy read, I'd say. I mean,
Mhm.
obviously, like I kind of described with the human like or the child like amusement park that sends them to the death. Like there are some like kind of horrifying concepts in it, but the way that those stories are told or the way that like it gets humanized by like the characters who are in them is like very well done. Like I know I keep saying that, but it was.
Nice. Yeah, it's like empathy. is included. And like, I feel like when you're trying to build something really complicated and you have like a shorter book, sometimes the pacing is really tough or like the writing can go off the rails. But if you have good writing, then it sounds like it shines.
Yeah, and I think it helps that because these were technically just, like, short stories, you could time jump a lot, and, like, they weren't necessarily these characters have to stay consistent through each story. It just happened that sometimes they, like, would, because the overarching theme was kinda like, how are we reacting to it and what that looks
Mhm.
like. But yeah,
Nice.
how was your book? Tell me more.
Um, it was good. Just as a reminder, I read Boy Parts by Eliza Clark. I think it was definitely something that was very different from what I've ever read. And then before we started recording, I kind of came on and I was like, I feel like I'm very cranky today and I don't really know why. And then I was like, oh, I think it was actually because like of reading this book and just like kind of the main character's interaction with people. Um, to kind of give an idea and like a little bit of a backstory, I think honestly, the synopsis on the book itself is going to do it a lot better justice. But this is a story about a photographer who is in, I want to say Scotland. Um, and she basically goes off and she just takes like her primary quote unquote muse is just like random boys that she pulls off of the street. And
Oh.
she'll find people and she'll hand them her like card and then take their photos and portraits. Except it's not portraits, it's a lot of just like nudes, and it's honestly just a lot of like explicit content that she's pulling.
Mm,
And she's
hence
accused
the
of that
name.
many times across. Yeah. And like the biggest, like the primary plot point that like moves the story forward. I cannot remember the word for this right now. The catalyst, if you will, the catalyst of the book is when she receives an email invitation to have her photographs have to be like she has to pick out a few photographs to be on display in a gallery. And so it's like through that email that she's kind of going back and forth and she's recounting all of these different like photo sessions that she's had throughout the years and how her art has changed. And like the way that I'm describing it right now is just very much like a dull version of this. I think the way that it was written was really fascinating, but it's like also very immediately clear that this is a person who is like one, I think she is, I can't tell if it's like one of the characters accuses her of like having BPD, which honestly I can't tell if it's like BPD. I can't tell if it's because she was raised around a narcissistic mother.
Mm.
I can't tell if she's a narcissist. I can't tell like if she's like genuinely like, I don't know. I think it might be sociopathic is like the word that I'm looking for. Because she genuinely like spends her time, like she mentions it multiple times where she like has to practice smiling and socializing. um
Ah.
and she like is very careful about like the masks that she wears, but she's like very good at manipulating people, but she isn't always as good at like reading how they perceive her, and so she tends to go above and beyond in trying to like get people's acceptance.
Hmm.
um and it was like honestly very fucked up. Like it was very much like you could tell early on that like the reason that she created these photographs was because these were people that made her feel exploited. And so now she like finds a way to kind of exploit them. Like she's like, I love beta males.
Ah.
And it's not necessarily because she's like particularly attracted to that. She's actually more attracted to things that like will genuinely hurt her. But like she is willing to exploit, hurt, and be somewhat attracted to like the pain that she can cause the quote unquote beta
Hmm.
males. Um,
Interesting.
it's very, very fucked up. I also, my first note from this book is literally the book is really good, is a really good ad. My first quote from this book is literally this book is a really good ad for the DARE program if it like managed to actually succeed. Because she like starts out and she's like, I like the first opening scene of this is like she's going to her job as a bartender and she's like, I feel very sick, like I'm not hungover. And she like very much starts compulsively lying like from the get-go.
Mm.
Um so as a reader, it takes a second, or it took me a second to be like, oh, is this a reliable narrator? And the answer
Mhm.
is absolutely the fuck not. Because she starts out and she's like, absolutely hungover. She's like, I'm not hungover, but I feel like I'm going to throw up. And so I started out as a reader and I was like, oh my God, I'm so concerned about this person. Like, is she
Yeah.
sick? Like, is this going to be a chronic illness? And then she was like, no, I'm just absolutely hungover. And then she goes home and she drinks more. She does additional coke. She finds some ketamine. She goes off and has a couple of like tabs of acid. She's like, I typically don't smoke weed, but like I guess we're gonna do that tonight. Um, and it's just like story after story of like how she was exploited, and then it was kind of paralleled with like, and then this is how she turned around and exploited someone else
Hmm.
in similar fashion to how she was previously exploited. And it was just extremely fucked up.
It sounds like it. Yeah, it sounds like a story of like hurt begets hurt, and it doesn't seem like it had a great resolution, or like I'm not entirely sure if there was supposed to be a resolution or if it's kind of more just like a character study on person. But I'm curious, like
Yeah.
I guess was like you said, the gallery they wanted to host her in a gallery. So
Mhm.
was this rest of the story kind of about like what she was going to put in it and like the background between everything, or was there like a now you're at the gallery, here is how people received it?
Yeah, so we kind of like walked through her process of picking the photos and like how she was living her life. It was kind of going back and forth between like this is she was it went back and forth between like this is like what's happening in the present versus what happened in the past.
Mm,
But throughout the entire thing, it's like she is still narrating what
okay.
happened in the past. So it's very much like I opened up this shoebox and I looked at this photo and these are all the things that had happened. And
Mm,
I'm telling you my story without breaking the fourth wall, which was also just a really fascinating way to read that story. And then we do eventually end up at the gallery and end up like a day past the gallery. And so we do kind of understand how people are perceiving the art, and like how she reacts to like feedback. And some of it is not even feedback, right? Like some of it is just like there's an artist who like gets upset because he's like a Nepo baby and he's like, why don't I have more space here?
so
Um, and I think like the other piece of it is there's like a key theme throughout this where everyone keeps telling her that she's beautiful and like her worth in this world is
ah,
that she is like a tall and beautiful woman. um but she's also just like one extremely weird just to begin with, and two, it's really funny because she very much gives a shit about like what people think about her, right? She has like her like 50 bajillion skincare routine,
mm,
that is like marked by her quote unquote friend. Um and she like yells at someone at one point where because she's like, I can't leave the house without my makeup yet.
mm,
And like she's like, I very much care about having like this dress and this look, and I know that like this is how people will react, and like very much like a form of manipulation. um
okay. Well,
so
sorry to interrupt, but I
no,
was
go
gonna
ahead.
say, is it so do you think like her caring about her appearance so much is because she wants to be able to use it to manipulate, or was it more like the case of she has heard it from society so much that like this is your worth that it's like become kind of
i
ingrained?
think I think it's both,
Okay.
and you just kind of see how it develops into both. She's like, well, I guess
Hmm.
this is how society is going to see me, so now I'm going to weaponize it.
Okay.
um and the way that she treats her friends is like honestly terrible. So it's like it's a little bit of story on like that character itself, but there's no character development that happens throughout the story, which is so frustrating. Like you see some of the characters around her kind of develop, um but it's almost just like it was almost a book where it was like this is just the harsh reality of the world, and this is how it ends. And it just like the ending was like you didn't really realize what the problem was until you got about like, I don't know, halfway through the book, third of the way through the book. And then there is no resolution for like
Mm,
kind of like the backup like existential crisis that she's
okay.
having, which I think I found personally frustrating because I like it when things get wrapped up in a
Yeah,
nice neat little bow.
same.
But I think overall it was a good read, and I think that it was good to like branch out of my comfort zone. But yeah, I think that that type of like just being in the mind of someone who like lacks that level of empathy was very startling.
I think that makes sense. It sounds like it's one of those things where if you're not prepared for it, like not to be like you're an empath, but like it could
Yeah.
very easily like kind of seep into it, especially when you're reading it in like such a short period of time.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those things where like it's not even, it's like some of it is, well, I don't know, probably empaths feel it a little bit more, but like I think that it's also that concept of like when you're watching TV and like the characters, like the way that they exist kind of seep into how you see the world for the
Hmm.
time being. Like I don't know about you, but when I watch Gilmore Girls, like I can regress so fast into like I don't know, like a season 5 Rory. And then I like feel it and I'm like, ah, that feels familiar. Don't go down that road. But yeah, it's like very like, it was very much like, wow, you're letting this like, seeing this on the page seep into how you're viewing the world right now.
Yeah.
So I guess that's like a good. This book is also just full of trigger warnings and content warnings for anyone who is listening.
Yeah.
Which hopefully, if you're listening to this, you've already read the book.
But it's still a good call out. So yeah, would you say that it sounds like she was a very hard character to root for, and then there was no character growth or resolution to like give you that triumphant feeling that something has happened? Would you say that's accurate, or was there any moments where you were like, okay, she had some redemption?
I don't know that she had redemption points. I think she had pitiable moments. Like it was just like I get why you are the way that you are, but it was also like at a certain point a lot of these things that you're doing is like just going to make it worse.
Mm-hmm.
And it was also like she was struggling with an eating disorder because she was like tall and skinny and
Yeah.
beautiful, and her mother was like a narcissist and kept commenting on it, right? And like even when she was talking about her best friend, she'd be like, she used to be like a nice little size 6 and now she's a size 14 and she is so fat. And it was like,
Mm.
oh my God. And all she ate was like literally bags of salad with some tuna in it. And I was like, how are you existing right now? So yeah, there really wasn't, there was just a lot more moments of like pity, I think,
Mm-hmm.
than like anything else.
That makes sense. Was the book in first person or third person?
It was in first person.
Okay, that makes sense given what you were
Yeah.
saying, but I wasn't sure. What did you end up rating it?
Um, Honestly, I think I need to give it like a 2.5. Um, Based on vibes, I will say like the writing for this character was really well done to the point where I'm like, yeah, I'm like literally I'm like I can't even empathize with her on all of these things, right? Like it's literally just pity. And I think the writer did a really good job of that. And also just like you felt attached to her feeling of detachment a little bit.
Hmm.
So I think that was just, it was really well written, but I just felt like shit reading it.
Yeah. No, I think that makes sense. It's like, obviously, I think if you're only giving your rating based off of like, how good of a book was this in terms of the typical grammar, like in terms of like English and writing, then obviously like it sounds like it was like a 4 or 5 or like pretty high up there.
Yeah.
But yeah, like when you're taking it into the full picture, you could still think the writing was well done and kind of hate the book. And I think that's okay.
Yeah. Storytelling, fantastic. 5 out of 10. Well, 4 out of 5. I wish we had an ending. But like, other than that, I'm like, this was, yeah. I think I need to read, oh my gosh, what is that book called? That's my year of
Rest and
relaxation.
relaxation, yeah. By
Yeah,
like
my
Odessa something.
yes. I feel like this is kind of what that book's vibes are. So I'm like very curious. I feel like I want to read that next and just like compare it a little bit.
Yeah, you totally should. And like for context, I'm pretty sure we were discussing this, and this rec is from one of our friends who has read my year of rest and relaxation and Bunny, and I feel like is into, I don't even know what type of genre that would be, but just like I'd say I guess like books that explore like more complicated or like more off the wall topic.
Yeah, like what is it? Not contemporary fiction, but kind of like dark academia esque
Yeah.
vibes.
Yeah. So like this does seem like on trend with that.
Yes.
But again, I think it like part of the fun part about doing these, I think, is that we are getting to read stuff that is out of our comfort zone and like is surprising to us. Like we ended up liking it, even if again the vibes were low, but the like it still was an enjoyable read.
100%. It was really well done. Would not change that.
Yeah. The interesting thing going from your book to my book is that obviously, like I said, they're short stories from a bunch of different characters' point of view. And so
Mm-hmm.
I think where you had like one constant character throughout and kind of like got into her mind and really kind of understood the nuances and had this hate relationship with her because she sounds awful.
Yeah.
The characters in my book, I think the way it was written was more emphasis on like world building and like taking characters from different aspects of this world and imagining what would they be thinking, what would they be like.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that really cool. So like for example, we get yeah, like the scientists who discovered the virus accidentally. We get a few people who work in these like funeral businesses. So like one person also works in like these funeral hotels where you could basically like
That's wild.
yeah, like spend time with the person after they die, but like in a nice environment. And then we get this scientist who was trying to discover a cure, who also, this is another thing, it's like this is kind of hard for me to visualize, but I guess they solved like wormholes or something, and he had somehow gotten like a black hole in his head, which in my
Interesting.
head is just like a guy with a black hole on his head, but I don't think that's how it was supposed to be. But yeah, it just like explored a lot of these different aspects of society in this day and age of this world, that I think really made the world seem complete and kind of painted a stark or a good picture of like what it was like, especially relating it to, like we talked about, the like our actual pandemic. Like obviously it was nowhere near on the same level in the sense of like what was happening, but
Mm-hmm.
yeah, kind of like the fear behind not knowing what's happening and just like not knowing, is it airborne or like how it even spreads, and those like initial stages of panic. So I thought that was fun, not necessarily fun, but like I thought that was like cool to read about.
How did you find, like, what was some of the commentary that you found? Like, you were saying that, like, it kind of felt like it was commenting on, like, the way that our world is. Yeah. So, like, what is some of that, like, political commentary that you found interesting?
Well, I think the one of the biggest ones that I noticed was just like, how can we capitalize on everything, right? Like financially, like all these different forms of businesses popped up, and they mentioned like Bitcoin type stuff, and like,
No.
yeah, I know. It was kind of funny. And yeah, like basically like they also mentioned like VR, like getting advanced and like forming those connections and like making a business out of that because people like miss their loved ones. And so like, different forms of VR, like robo dogs. So I think that was, yeah, that was like the one of the big ones, which is just like at the end of the day, people will take this and still find a way to be like, how can we make money off of it?
Mhm.
And then the other one I'd say that was coming through a lot was around community, which I know we talk a lot about. And just like towards like the end of the book, it was kind of that sense of like everyone knows somebody who has lost someone, and it kind of feels like everyone is just going about their days, not wanting to talk to each other, like not making eye contact, and instead of seeking out community and friends, and just like literally another person, everyone wants to kind of keep to themselves and like sit in their own grief. And I feel like that has been something I've read a lot about, where yeah, it does seem like post pandemic people are more comfortable at home, or just like finding it harder to make friends, or like less, maybe it's not even just the pandemic thing, maybe it's just like the like our generation's things, but like they have a harder time putting themselves out there, and everyone seems to feel like a loss of connection somewhat.
Mhm.
And so I thought that was like kind of interesting, because the points I think some of the books was make some of the stories we're making was around like, no, like building community is good, it can be very helpful, very healing, and like everyone deals with grief differently. But here's some examples of like, okay, this person was in a neighborhood cul-de-sac, they like usually worked late and like stayed at home with their or and then came home with their son and their wife, and like didn't really say anything. But now they've lost their son and wife and realize like, hey, I don't know my neighbors that well, I like don't know
Yeah.
this version of my like wife with you, and now I want to start to like build those connections and stuff like that.
Okay, that makes sense. I feel like, yeah, I was going to ask just in terms of community, and I think you kind of answered a lot of it, of just like, it sounds similar to what we're seeing around a lot, especially now when, like, with the election, and we all kind of felt like something just like pulled one over on us. And a lot of the commentary is around, like, yeah, like we all want these things, but then we also don't say hi to our neighbors, which is
Mm-hmm.
like so valid. I genuinely don't know who lives next door to me, which is
Yeah,
probably a problem.
same.
And it's an interesting concept because I feel like we also, on the flip side, a lot of times, like, we'll talk about a lot of people like forming friendships through like all these trauma bonds and things like that. And you would
Mm-hmm.
think that like something that this big would cause a trauma bond. But then at this point, I'm like, is there like a rule of, I mean, it sounds like it's because it's an extreme case of that, you almost end up in the extreme opposite direction of any kind of trauma bond, which is just to like pull yourself away and just feel isolated.
Mm-hmm.
um did they have a resolution to like handling that grief and creating that community, or
I think kind of. I feel like there was definitely stories of people coming together. So, like, one thing I was going to say is that I don't know if all of them were supposed to be, but a lot of the characters were Asian. I think specifically Japanese, because there was definitely some scenes like set in Japan, or like people talking about like their relationship with their parents and like having Asian parents who were kind of overbearing. And I thought that was interesting because I feel like usually Japan, Asian countries are known for being more of a collective than like
Mhm.
individualistic, like in America. And so one of the stories was talking about how um, this grandma died, and like with all the years of the pandemic, like I think this was like a generational thing. It wasn't just like our few years. Not to minimize what happened, but like this
No,
was,
but
yeah,
like,
picture lifetimes.
and you
Um,
just like multiply that level of like just terror.
yeah, exactly. And but because of this, I guess there was like six families in this community who like bonded together to do like a grave pact, where it's like they just put all everyone's ashes in the same urn. And I guess like if someone died, they all like came together to celebrate that person and just like looked out for each other. um and so the story was about this one of the granddaughters who had moved to America, basically was starting a new life. And like how coming back to Japan for her grandma's funeral was gratifying, in the sense that like she missed that aspect of kind of everyone's looking out for each other. And obviously there's like two ends to that spectrum, which is kind of what she was
Mhm.
talking about, which is like it's kind of stagnant. Everyone is still here. The same people I grew up with are still working the same jobs, like doing the same things. But then there's also the other side of that, which is like the sense of like ritual and just like, I guess, reliability
Yeah.
that comes from that. And so, yeah, I think like that there's like a few examples. There's another example with like a story of a woman who goes into space, and she like this is like with a spaceship who's like trying to find Earth 2 or another inhabitable planet, in case this one gets fucked up, which sounds
Good.
familiar. And so she also connects with like this other woman who was the mom in a different story, who lost her son at the amusement park. And they're both artists. And so they talk about how like we're going to paint the spaceship walls to reflect like different people's lives. And so in order to do that, they actually like start to talk to like the crew members and the different people aboard the spaceship,
Oh.
and learn about their lives. And kind of like there I specifically remember this sentence around like the chief engineer became Mark, and like the lunch lady became like Sue. So like learning more about these people beyond just like their jobs in this situation. So yeah, I would say like it's not. I wouldn't be like they were like, here's how you solve your problem, but there is definitely examples of like, here is what bonding with other people and like banding together can solve or can do for you.
It's really interesting. It's like the concept of like humanizing the people around became especially important, but also just like, I don't know. It helps to understand like, okay, there is a reason that we have traditions sometimes, and it's not just to be annoying. It's to like bind together a community in times like this.
Yeah, 100%. Well said.
Um, yeah, I'm thinking about this book in terms of like any kind of political commentary, and honestly, like there wasn't a ton. It took me a second to be like, what year is this at all?
Mm-hmm.
So there was like some explicit political commentary just in terms of like one of her friends like gets back from New York and she's like, yeah, New York, like it's a lot better because everyone hates Trump, but this is still Trump's America. And I was like, oh, I did not expect that
Oh,
mention. Especially right now, I was like, oh, that hit a little bit too close to home. Especially because I think that this like was set in like 2016 when it was like, yeah, this sucked, but like, who knew that all of this was going to happen, you know?
yeah.
But I think more than that, it was just like this commentary. And in particular, she had this line that I kind of wrote down where she was like asking herself, like, what do I need to leave a mark and like to make them scared? Because she had all of these like men that were in extremely compromised situations. Like, I'm talking like beat down, bruised, like full blown, like choked them out type of deal, had a knife in her hand, and all of these men were still just like, ha ha ha, it's just a pretty girl doing all these things to me. And it was like
Mm,
very much this commentary on the concept of like toxic masculinity existing. And like how far a person will go to show how masculine they are.
Mm.
Because even at the end of like all of these, like they would cry and run out of these rooms or like be sobbing. And at the end of the day, she would be like, I asked if you wanted me to stop, and they'd be like, I'm so sorry, like you totally did, and it's on me. And like some of this is like how manipulative she is, but there's like a bigger piece of this too where it's like no matter what she does as a woman, like there was no way that she could be perceived as the same kind of predator that like women are perceiving men
Mm-hmm.
at literally any time. And then it's also just like there was a couple of scenes of full blown SA, and it was just like it took a second because the way that she rationalized that in her head, she was like, "Oh, this happened, but then blah 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 blah," but also all of these other things, and it
Mm.
was like enough that she was able to weaponize like one of those moments a little bit later on, which like worked out in her favor. But it was also just like it was jarring to watch her kind of like talk herself out of some of these things, and also to like see people in real time be like, so I went to a self-defense class like literally 3 days ago, and the lady at the class was like, if someone tells you that they've been assaulted, like believe them. And that line was just running through my head so many times because like in this scene, she was like, this is what happened to me. And her best friend was like, I don't know if it did. Like, you're kind of a compulsive liar.
Mm.
And it's like, yeah, she very well could have made this up as is like her entire personality, which, like, you know, sounds familiar in the media. But like, also, there's the chance that she didn't. And there's this moment of like, it really should have been someone in her corner to band against it and
Mm-hmm.
like to tell her, like, hey, that's not okay. And then she just like never had a person in her life that like told her at the right time that something wasn't okay. Like when she was being groomed, it wasn't a conversation until much later, and she was like, I didn't even realize I was being groomed because I was enjoying this. And it's just a really like there's a lot of just like moments of like power struggles, I think,
Mm.
and how power exists between men and women and in like age and in society as a whole. And like how we interact with each other, and just like it was just like the gritty underworld of like reality, I guess. And it was very disturbing. I did not enjoy it.
Yeah.
Um,
Sounds like it.
yeah.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to hear you talk about this because it kind of seems like every trauma trope that you think about in books kind of seems like it was talked about and explored in her background, which is crazy. So I can just
Yeah.
imagine like what it was like reading through all that, but also like how that would have influenced like how the character developed growing up and like what it, you read about.
Yeah, and then like going back to that question before of like, is there empathy or pity? It's like it's astounding that even after all of this, it was like you couldn't really find a lot of empathy for this person just based on how she acted. It was still a lot more like pity and maybe some sympathy.
Yeah.
Um, but there was no point where I was like, yeah, it was really fascinating to watch that happen and just be like, wow, this is like the worst of the world showed up in this girl's life
Yeah.
consistently.
Yeah. Wow. Well,
Well,
on that note, do you have anything else to add?
no, I think that was pretty much it. It was, if you're looking for a good political commentary on the concept of sexism and mental illness, read Boy Parts.
Yeah. And I would honestly say like How High We Go in the Dark was a very like it did explore kind of like some fucked up aspects, but I don't think it was anywhere near that level and I didn't like I think I found it a lot more interesting to and it was I definitely think more focused on like humanity, like the concept of like how can we care for each other and how can we form these connections in like darker times or like relationships between people are complex, but kind of like you get to see like both sides of like how people can
Mhm.
justify doing different things and like why they think like okay, missing out on my daughter's growing up is important because I'm trying to save humanity. Like it was just like very interesting to explore all these different, I guess, viewpoints. So
Interesting.
if that sounds fun, and also I don't think it's something that you need to like because they're like, kind of short stories that are somewhat intertwined. It's not something you need to just like, you know, spend a lot of time and energy and mental resources keeping track of people, or it's very easy to pick up and put down.
That is ideal.
Yeah. So,
All right.
anyways, Thank you all for joining us on this week's episodes. We hope you enjoyed. As always, follow us on TikTok and on Instagram, Bookish Haze Pod, and let us know if you've read these books and what you think, or if you're planning to read them. And we'll see you all in the next episode.
Bye.
Bye.